good morning and welcome to the Sunday Supplement. The most extraordinary season of them all will finally come to an end today, 351 days after it started. Though Wolves fans will tell you that they've been playing for over a year, and of course there's European competition and the playoffs still to be contested. 3 teams are battling it out for 2 Champions League places, and 3 teams are fighting for their very Premier League status. It will all be decided today. And with us to discuss the inevitable drama, my guest today, making his Sunday Supplement debut, it's Riath Al-Samarrai, the chief sports feature writer from the Daily Mail. James Olley joins us. He's the senior football writer for ESPN. And last but by no means least, the chief football writer for the Daily Mirror is John Cross. Now, the back pages of today's Sundays are all about the fear of not qualifying for the Champions League, the fear of going down. Here we are with the back page. Well, actually, it's the front page, isn't it, of the football pullout of the Sunday People. Fear we go. The Sun, always good for a headline. I've gone with a line from Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's press conference. Squeaky plum time from them. The Sunday Express concentrating on relegation. It's last chance saloon for those 3 clubs battling to stay in the Premier League. And the Mirror have gone with the inevitable financial ramifications, cash, bang and wallop. And finally, to sum it all up, this is the back page of the Sunday Telegraph. And I think that's fair, isn't it? A final day to relish. So let's get into it now. Let's start with that battle for the Champions League places. 3 teams fighting out for 2 places, and 2 of those teams, Leicester City and Manchester United, go head-to-head. Now, John, there's a lot of talk in football about momentum. And if you look back to January the 22nd, Manchester United have turned around a 14-point swing on Leicester City. So who, in your opinion, is favourite going into this crunch battle?
Well, you'd have to say that Manchester United have it completely in their own hands. But equally, I think the most pressure is on Manchester United, because let's not make any mistake about this. I do think their second half of the season has been remarkable. Bruno Fernandes has clearly had a huge influence in that. What an inspirational signing he has been. But it's still a day of reckoning for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, because Man United are expected to finish top 4. That's the least. That's the base minimum requirement for any Man United team. But also in terms of commercially, I think some of the commercial deals take a significant hit if they're not in the Champions League. In terms of prestige, Manchester United are one of the most glamorous clubs in the world. If United fans would argue they are the most glamorous club in the world, so they are expected to make Champions League. Whereas I think for Chelsea, I think no one should underestimate the job that Frank Lampard has done. Absolutely remarkable. In his first full season as a Premier League manager, on the back of a transfer ban. I'm amazed that when we talk about contenders for Manager of the Year, that Frank Lampard doesn't get a mention in there. In my mind, if they're in the FA Cup final 2, and if they were to win the Cup and finish top 4, what a remarkable job he's done. I'm not saying he would absolutely win it, but he should be in that conversation. For Leicester, I just think that it's been an incredible fairy tale. Listen, they've still got that chance. They've still got that opportunity to do it. No one expected Leicester really to be in the top 4. Brendan Rodgers, I think overall, even if they miss out today, I think everything in context, they've had key injuries towards the end of the season and out today. That would be an unbelievable bonus on top of a really impressive first full season at the club for Brendan Rodgers. But in my view, it's Manchester United with the pressure on. They're expected to do it. I think ultimately they will do it. But what a fantastic duel. 3-2 just doesn't go. So the pressure is on today.
Yeah, I'd go along with what John's saying. I mean, the pressure on United is obviously massive. They're the ones who've got to. I know Brendan Rodgers has been saying the same thing this week, which I think we can all probably see through sort of reasonably transparently, sort of piling a bit of pressure onto United, saying that they're the ones who need it. But I think if we take it in isolation with Leicester, the way they've played this season has been brilliant. But if they do fail to get in, it will still be a massive implosion. Again, what you're saying there, I think it was 14 points clear in January. United have gone on this run, and that's coincided with Leicester chucking it away almost. I know they've had their injuries, but they would have to look at it. And yeah, if they finish fifth, it's still clearly a very, very good season, but it's a massive missed opportunity. We've seen sort of Solskjaer talking a little bit about it this week. I think I read him quoting Winston Churchill earlier in the week, which I must say feels a little bit dramatic in a battle for sort of third, fourth, and fifth. But the point remains. I mean, it's United really. This will define Solskjaer's management up until this point. If they can get it done, then he's done a good job. If he doesn't, then they have to look at it as a missed opportunity, which is perhaps unfair, but that's the reality of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Solskjaer's the jury's more out on Solskjaer than it is on Frank Lampard and Brendan Rodgers. I mean, the irony of all of this really is that all three clubs, whoever misses out, they're going to feel like they've blown it. You know, Leicester obviously had that big 14-point advantage over United in January. Chelsea have been in the top four for most of the season, and United, up until the last couple of games, it looked like they were going to kind of run away with third almost, and they had those two draws that have put them right back in the mix. So, yeah, I mean, I think to convince that United are on the right path, I mean, financially they can take the hit of another season out of the Champions League. Although Crossy's right, there are commercial factors in play. I think it's 22.5 million from Adidas that they'll miss out on if they don't qualify for the Champions League. So that's, a significant sum to any club. But really, I think it's about a conviction that the manager that's currently at the helm is the right one to take the club forward. I think Frank Lampard's conclusively proved that, and the club are already back. They've already spent money in the window this summer prior to knowing whether they're in Champions League or not. I think Leicester are in a good place. They're clearly a progressive side under Brendan Rodgers. Nobody would have expected them to finish in the top four. I think if United do blow it, that there will be those questions again about whether Solskjaer long-term is actually the best manager for United. If he can instigate this run to get them into the top four right at the end, then they spend big in the summer, then it will feel like there is a momentum going into next season that Solskjaer really can take them forward and take them back to where they want to be, which is challenging for the title.
The ramifications of missing out, Martin Ziegler in the Times yesterday estimated that the cost of not being in the Champions League could be as much as £100 million. But is it more than just about the financial side of things, John?
Yeah, absolutely it is, particularly I think for United. I mean, Chelsea would argue otherwise, but I do think it still has a bearing for them. Of course, they want to be a club playing on the top European stage, but for United, it's so important. A club steeped in history and tradition, and a club that really is trying to move forward. Is clearly going in the right direction. Wow, they've got an exciting young forward line, haven't they? Emergence of Mason Greenwood towards the second half of the season and his goals tally. That guy can break into the England setup and be at the Euros next summer, because basically we've had 12 months grace, and I think we've seen his emergence. It's a team that I think is so exciting. It's got so much potential that I'd love to see them, quite apart from the financial aspect, have the opportunity to grow and blossom on the Champions League stage, because I think the Champions League, playing at that level, brings out the best in young players. And there's no doubt about it that United have some of those, the best youngsters in the country right now. And they're such an exciting team to watch. So I think that is obviously why Manchester United, in terms of history and prestige and finances, but also the development of players, that's why Solskjaer will realise how important this is.
Yeah, it's like what you're saying there in terms of direction, travel, and momentum. I think if they're going to be making sort of subsequent steps, and particularly this summer, if they're going to be signing players like Jadon Sancho, I think it's contingent on United getting into the top four, into the Champions League places, that they're competing for those kinds of players against, or best players coming through, sort of best players currently on the scene. If they don't do it, United they're still going to be presenting themselves in that kind of status where they're not moving, they're not developing. And again, it's what it all boils down to, I think, for Solskjaer's reputation is probably the wrong word, but his standing, whether or not he truly is the right guy for the club, whether or not these bursts of form that we see, which then seem to hit sort of grinding halts, which we might have been looking at for the last couple of weeks again. That's what they need. They need to show that they can now get this done, and that in turn is going to be it's going to massively influence what they look like to sort of prospective signings.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. And I think we all know the history and the prestige of Manchester United. But if you're an 18-year-old, 19-year-old who's got his pick of clubs, who could go to a top club, anywhere in Europe, you start to look at United and you think, well, they haven't won the title in England for 7 years now. So an 18-year-old would have been 11 when United last won the league. And we're getting to it's almost a generational point now where, in this country, we're used to thinking of United as being one of the biggest clubs in the world, as being a side that are going through a blip at the moment, who are not able to hit the level consistently of Liverpool and Manchester City in terms of going for the title. But the longer that goes on, the more that perception, it changes from being a blip to actually they have dropped to a level where they are clearly below, and it becomes harder to convince players that they're going to be able to bridge that gap. Now, initially they did it with money. Frankly, they were offering huge wages. You think about the money that they've offered to Alexis Sanchez and players who they were competing with. In that case, Manchester City. That was a case of, well, we can offer you more money. Well, they've still got that money, less so if they don't get to the Champions League. And obviously the coronavirus pandemic has hit every single club. United insulated from it more than most. But really, those players I'm talking about, like the Jadon Sanchos, who've got the kind of world at their feet and can go anywhere they want to. They want to be in the Champions League. They don't want to wait 2 or 3 years. They want to be competing for the biggest prizes now because they're at that level where they feel they can do it. And United have to show as a club that they are there. And clearly, if they're not in the Champions League, then it's going to be far less appealing to that top level talent to want to go to Old Trafford.
Those games coming up for you on Sky Sports a bit later on as Leicester play Man United and Chelsea play Wolves, who are in a fight with Tottenham for the Europa League. Riath, how important for Spurs is European football next season, albeit in the second competition?
I think it's probably. I'd probably make the argument it's more important as a point of pride. I think missing out on Europe will be a dreadful look. I think we'd also say that, for Mourinho, in terms of the aesthetics of it, if he doesn't take them into Europe, it looks bad. Missing out on it, I think it's the usual thing. It's the Europa League. I don't think it would actually be an altogether terrible thing for Spurs to miss out on the Europa League next season. But again, the optics of it would be less than ideal. I mean, Daniel Levy's put himself into a little bit of a corner in bringing in Mourinho. So you need guarantee if you're going to go down that road. I'm sure we'll talk about it a bit more later. But if you're going to go down the road of bringing in Mourinho, you need to have success. And at this stage, in what Tottenham are playing for, missing out on the Europa League would be a failure. But that's again, it could also be a blessing.
I must say, I often think there's almost a lazy assumption that basically you can do without the Europa League, that clubs don't really want to be in the Europa League. We could talk about the kind of the Europa League and how it's played out and how it's valued all day long. Personally, I like the competition. I'm somewhat disappointed in the recent past. The English clubs haven't taken it more seriously. I think in the last couple of seasons we've seen, I think, the argument against that, because obviously winning it gets you a Champions League place. Chelsea won it last season. Man United have done it in the recent past. So it's clearly a trophy worth winning. But it's not just about the trophy. In a time when clubs have been financially, hit so very hard, that the notion that actually it would be better to be outside of the Europa League and have a clear run at the Premier League and kind of enjoy that season without European football is just so naive. Clubs need it from a financial perspective. The cost that it would hit Tottenham with for missing out would be huge on the back of, this pandemic, the cost that's brought, a new stadium. Equally, I think for Wolves, it's been such a lift. They'll be desperate to try and maintain sixth place today. You can't bet against them. You can't write them off from getting a result at Chelsea. They've been, upsetting the big boys all season. for clubs that miss out, it will be devastating for Arsenal if they don't get into Europe from a financial perspective. It really will. So I do think that we sometimes underestimate the importance of the Europa League, and never more so than this summer. Missing out will be an absolute hammer blow financially for the clubs that want to be in it. And equally for Spurs, it's an absolute must. And I think Jose Mourinho knows that. And I think actually you have to give him a little bit of credit for steering Spurs back into potentially sixth place and clinching that Europa place today.
One thing that is never underestimated is the value of being in the Premier League. When we come back after the break, we'll have a look at relegation and the nerves currently going on at Villa, Watford and Bournemouth. Welcome back to the Sunday Supplement. Now, after that huge win for Aston Villa over Arsenal on Tuesday, it's only one of three clubs who could go down this season. Watford go to Arsenal, Villa go to West Ham, and Bournemouth are at Everton. James, who has the hardest game?
Well, I mean, Bournemouth have got to win, haven't they? So you'd kind of be tempted to say that they've got the toughest game. I suppose on paper Watford have, but you don't really know what Arsenal team Mikel Arteta is going to pick, bearing in mind they've got the cup final to come and nothing to play for in the league. And obviously West Ham have kind of done the job, really. They're safe now and they can play with a bit of freedom against a Villa side that, have finally found some form right at the key moment. So it's looking pretty bleak for Bournemouth, you have to say, because obviously if they win, they're not guaranteed to get out of it. They still need results to go their way. So, I think Bournemouth are the ones staring down the barrel today, really.
Yeah, I'd fear for Bournemouth as well. And there's obviously quite a lot of sadness attached to that, really, as well. I think we all want to see Eddie Howe doing well. He's done a fantastic job there, and it just feels like the wheels have kind of come off after about 5 years. And I've seen a few of their games lately, and they're not playing badly, and that's the only thing that I would say offers any potential of them doing anything away at Everton. But the problem they do have is they can't finish. They are creating, which is something. And sort of David Brooks, they've got a very good player, but they're not finishing. I mean, other than the Leicester game when they got 4, and that was really a Leicester implosion. They're doing very little. They didn't take their chances against Man City. Didn't take their chances against Southampton or against Tottenham. And speaking to Eddie Howe after that game against Southampton the other day, they really looked broken. He was distraught, probably about as low as I've certainly ever seen him in the last 5 years. And you just wonder whether or not emotionally that they've got what's necessary to rebound. So I'm sure he's prepared them as well as they can. But that one last week really felt like the decisive game for Bournemouth.
I must agree completely with Riath there. So often I think in the media it's almost about perception, isn't it? I mean, if you kind of almost flip that on its head, I think that Norwich this season have had remarkable sort of favourable coverage. I mean, even before kind of lockdown, or I might remember tweeting myself or something. There must be the best bottom of the table season ever, team ever. And yet, post-lockdown, they've been absolutely shocking. And it just feels like sometimes, blimey, they can lose 4-0 and you almost get another, isn't Stuart Webber wonderful sporting director feature coming on? It's bizarre, really. And yet, here's Eddie Howe, having had 5 years at Bournemouth. Bournemouth, let's remember that, in the Premier League. Eddie Howe has done a remarkable job, absolutely remarkable job. And I think we almost talk about kind of Eddie Howe, kind of as he missed his opportunity. I just think he's been fantastic to get Bournemouth up, to keep them up for 5 years, even if they go down today. Let's keep it in context. That's been an incredible achievement, a once in a generation thing. And that achievement shouldn't be underestimated. And I just think they deserve a little bit more credit. I think it's clearly the hardest, task for them today. And I just think, actually, they've done well overall. I think the club to have blown it the most has been, without question, Watford. I just think Watford, it seems they've shot themselves in the foot. They've imploded with Nigel Pearson. They've sacked 3 managers this season. I must say, I think they deserve, quite a lot of criticism if they go down. Listen, if they stay up, then that's fine. And you could argue that, bearing in mind, if they don't lose as heavily or get a bit better result than Villa, they stay up today. But I think the way that Watford have been run this season, isn't right. I do think that kind of Nigel Pearson challenged some of those players. The players clearly didn't like it, and Nigel Pearson is on his way. And I just think to treat managers and for the hierarchy to hire and fire managers such as this, they've brought it on themselves, Watford. I think it's been a poorly run, poorly managed club this season.
James, do you agree with John there? Do you think Gino Pozzo, the chairman, should take as much of the blame as any of his other managers this season?
I think if you have 4 managers in the season, it smacks of an alarming lack of direction, really, at the top of the club. What I would say, though, is that if you think about where Watford were when the Pozzo family took over in 2012, they were adrift in the Championship. They were facing a winding up order from HMRC, and I think if you talk to Watford fans, they will tell you that they accept that this hire and fire culture is an unconventional but effective method for success. They've reached the FA Cup final last season. Look, I mean, I actually think that the mistake that Watford made this time was going back to Flores when they sacked Javi Gracia. That, I think, felt like a backward step. I can understand why they did it. They felt he had unfinished business at the club from his first spell in charge. But really, going to him and then getting rid of him as quickly as they did, and then obviously having Pearson come in and instigate that improvement, there comes a point where you kind of have to back a manager. And I think they decided, although they'd already sacked him, that was going to be Flores the second time around. That clearly didn't work out. Nigel Pearson, I think, did a very good job. I agree with Crossy in that regard. He certainly did challenge the players. We've heard of rumours of falling out behind the scenes with the Pozzo family. I mean, they're very close to it. We often criticise owners for being too distant, for not taking an interest in the day-to-day running of a club. The Pozzos are the absolute opposite of that. They are heavily involved. You could argue almost too close in some regards, that if there is a bust-up, if there is a disagreement, sometimes it's better if the owner doesn't hear about it and the people involved kind of, have that disagreement and draw a line under it and move on. I think that they're very uncompromising. It's very no nonsense there. If you do have a disagreement, you're out and you're on your way. And perhaps in future they just need to apply a little bit more patience when they've got a manager who's clearly instigating an improvement, as Nigel Pearson did.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. Look, the Pozzo family, they're not idiots. I mean, we're seeing, we seem to be in a particularly hot era for bad owners, and I don't think you'd ever put Pozzos in that bracket. I mean, if they're making errors, they're almost errors in good faith. We're not seeing anything underhand, but 3 managers in a season it's baffling. Again, if we go back and look at sort of the Pozzos, what they've done, I mean, we're talking about FA Cup final last season in Italy, sort of, 12 years ago, Pozzo was sort of named the best president in Serie A. So, these guys, they know football. They're pioneering new things with their scouting systems. They are not a bad group of people to have in charge of your club. And that being said, you look at the Nigel Pearson sacking, and all of the sort of information, sort of noise around it is about kind of confrontations behind the scenes. And you're wondering, so have they even Googled Nigel Pearson before they appointed him? Because if they have, this really shouldn't be too much of a surprise that from time to time he can get a little bit emotional and colourful. So you have to look at that and wonder sort of why that could be a tipping point in a relationship, because at the moment it looks like a terribly bad decision and really badly timed.
It's really interesting, I think, because at various points this season, there's no doubt about it. There's been whispers and rumours about, is Dean Smith in trouble at Aston Villa, and it seems to me it's almost like the opposite picture playing out as at Watford. Villa have got their man, they've stuck with their man, and I think they deserve credit for doing so. And listen, Villa might look back if they go down today and say, should we have twisted? Should we have taken the gamble? But I think you've got to be pretty heartless, I think, in this scenario to not think that Dean Smith, lifelong Villa fan, he's absolutely, he basically has got the claret and blue coursing through his veins, basically. And I actually think, bearing in mind, they've lost key players this season for quite a long period of time. You're looking at Heaton and McGinn, obviously missing chunks of the season. McGinn has come back post-lockdown. I don't think it's looked quite the same player that he was pre, for obvious reasons, because I think you're sort of kind of battling to get back to match fitness in a short space of time. But I think they've tried to entertain us. I mean, the other night was dramatic, wasn't it? It was an incredible victory to put themselves back in the picture on the final day. And I must say, I've got a certain affection for them that would like me to to see them stay up, really, because I just think they're glamorous club steeped in history. We go to Villa Park, you enjoy it. It's one of the great grounds of English football, and I think that Dean Smith is a good story. And frankly, I think also that the consequences for them, if they were to go down, would be catastrophic, as it would, of course, for all the clubs. I do think that Villa have given themselves one hell of a chance. They've looked dead and buried themselves at various points in this relegation scrap. But to win the other night on Tuesday, to set up that final day drama, to put it back in their own hands, I do think that that's been an incredible story.
And you can see a couple of those games on Sky Sports later on. We'll give you the details later on. Now, let's head to the Championship, shall we, after the break. Leeds are back after 16 years in the wilderness. We'll look back at a Championship season and ahead to the playoffs. Welcome back to the Sunday Supplement. Leeds United are back in the big time after a 16-year absence. They were crowned champions this week and they will play Premier League football. Riath, let's start with you. What should be their first priority, do you think, this summer to prepare for Premier League football?
I think that should be a reasonably straightforward one for them. They've got to get Bielsa signed to a new contract. They've got to take care of his future, which you would hope is going to be quite a straightforward thing to do after the battle of getting back up. It would be very strange if he wasn't there when they resume the Premier League. I think we're obviously all meant to be quite impartial on these things. I just think it's great that Leeds are back. The Premier League is just it's a far more interesting place when they're there. They seem to have rivalries in almost all points of the country, which is probably a unique legacy of way back when. And they bring drama. Even when they're doing well, they bring drama. After Christmas, they had their little collapse. They've typically contrived to throw things away in the past. They've managed to get over the line, and that's fantastic. Suddenly we can all go back, and we've seen plenty of really good retrospective features on it. And the stuff that went on last time, sort of Ridsdale's goldfish, Seth Johnson's contract negotiations, Champions League run. There is literally nothing straightforward about that club, and they can come up and they can do something potentially spectacular because it really is a huge club, or they can go and do something totally horrific and horrible that we can't even imagine because it's Leeds, and that's what Leeds do. So I just think it's wonderful that they're back.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to underestimate how important Bielsa is to this whole situation, though, because he has been the key figure that's overhauled the whole image of the club, really. The sort of basket case club that Riath is describing there. They've now, they are now a purposeful, driven, intelligently managed outfit, and it's all moulded around one man. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Wolves and Nuno there. They're buying players to fit a specific system. They're not going to face the challenge that a lot of newly promoted sides, particularly ones that have been away for a long time or don't have recent experience of the Premier League anyway, do we stick with the same squad? Do we try and, upgrade, spend lavish money on big signings, proven Premier League players? I don't think Leeds are going to find that issue. Obviously, they're going to need to strengthen where they can. but they already have a clear identity. They press to within an inch of their lives. They're aggressive. Tactically they're so intelligent. They're well drilled. Every player knows exactly what's required of them every week. It's why Bielsa can sit on a bucket on the touchline and kind of let them get on with it. He's the most relaxed man in the stadium on a match day quite often at times. So, he is pivotal to the whole process and the whole chances of them staying up. So obviously they need to nail him down. I'm sure conversations are going on at the moment about exactly the level of backing that he's going to get, both in terms of financially, contractually, and with the players that he'll want to keep there. And really, once they've got him in place, I think everything's set because, as I say, they kind of have an identity. I remember watching them. I covered an FA Cup game in January when they played at Arsenal, and they looked like, obviously Arteta had just taken over then, and Arteta was still trying to implement this sort of, it's a vaguely similar style in that he's trying to get them to press, trying to be more compact. But Leeds were the sort of finished article in that regard. There was such a clear vision of how they wanted to play, and it's very exciting to think about how that will play in the Premier League. You think it would be suited. Their running stats are through the roof in the Championship. They are one of the most aggressive sides in the division. That will play well in the top flight. So it's in addition to all of the talk about the prestige and obviously the stadium and everything and having them back, I think having Bielsa in the Premier League and his style is only going to add an extra dimension to the division as a whole.
I really like Leeds' setup. I do think that they're incredibly well geared up, obviously, for the Premier League. We know their history. We know Ellen Rowe, what that will bring to the Premier League. But actually, earlier in the season, I went up to the training ground, and it's such a good professional setup there. The club has been well structured, well run. Yes, you could argue, of course, that they're probably gambled on going up, so spent, to the absolute maximum of their means. But they've achieved it, and they've achieved it almost by going for the superstar manager in Bielsa. So they've kind of put their money on the manager rather than actually investing in huge names for the squad. But then that's not to deride, some of the talent within that squad. I mean, I look at someone like Calvin Phillips, for example, and you watch him play. I actually interviewed him earlier in the season, and he speaks well. He's got very level-headed, very, very passionate about the club, and you wouldn't bet against them that when they get into the Premier League and play on that platform, that he could perhaps push himself onto the England stage. I really think that they're going places on Bielsa, and Bielsa is so important to them, and he'll be a character. I also think that it's similarly with Slaven Bilic at West Brom. I think people were worried about kind of, Leeds blowing up, sort of showing their nerves post-lockdown because they have such a history, don't they, of blowing up and missing out. But they were the ones that actually, took off. And it was West Brom who had their little wobble, and then they held their nerve at the end. It was such an exciting final day in the Championship. And I think that, that is testament to, I think, what many people sort of see outside the Premier League as arguably the best division, best league in the world. I mean, it was that good that watching that coverage on that final day, as I did, from luxury of my own home, really, and watching it and unfold, watching one live game. I watched the West Brom game, and they kind of quickly flashed across to the dramas happening elsewhere. I wonder that, that I think, and lockdown perhaps is almost a template for live football moving forward, because it was so exciting, it was so well covered, and it was so well played out. That it just showed actually what an exciting league the Championship is.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the point about Calvin Phillips, because he's actually quite a good example of how Bielsa, has improved players both individually and tactically. He was a box-to-box midfielder. He kind of saw himself as somebody who was going to be more advanced, more attacking, more trying to get involved in the final third. And Bielsa's changed him into arguably one of the brightest young English defensive midfielders in the country. And that he's just a very good example of how Bielsa's been able to not only, yes, as John says, they've spent considerable sums, but they've also Bielsa's improved the players he already had at his disposal. So that's great credit to Bielsa. I think Bilic deserves a mention as well. They weren't out of the top two I think it was September the 9th. They got into the top two. They weren't out all the day, and then right at the end, when the pressure's at its highest, needing that point against QPR, he gambled. He played Callum Robinson through the middle. He'd been playing him left wing all season. And that kind of bravery will play well in the Premier League, and obviously was rewarded on the final day.
So West Brom securing their automatic spot on Wednesday in, as John said, that most terrific night of football. So there's one place left to be decided. It's going to be between Brentford, Fulham, Cardiff or Swansea, as what Matt Dickinson calls the alluring chaos of the Championship goes on. Riath, where's your money for the playoffs?
I don't. Instinctively, I want to say Brentford, but I struggle to see how they recover after the way it's finished. So they've lost to Stoke and Barnsley, and something that was in their hands has disappeared. I think that's going to be an awfully hard thing to recover from. Romantically, I think Swansea would be a nice choice to go up. I've spent quite a lot of time covering them, so that's possibly a predictable answer. But they are by far the least resourced out of the clubs going to trying to get back up there. And they've, in Steve Cooper, they've got a manager who's done this fantastic job. Again, there was a time at Swansea where anything that wasn't sort of nailed down was being sold. The American owners have created their takeover, created a lot of disharmony at the club, a lot of unhappiness, and then they've managed to crept into sort of the playoff places in that absolute madness of the other night. That sort of 20-minute spell, they've managed to get a 5-goal swinging Vincent Garner and sort of crept into there. I would give them, with that momentum, I'd give them a puncher's chance and it would be a massive upset if Swansea got back up.
I agree with Riath. I mean, sometimes it's interesting when you look back on the history of this, that basically it is a compacted mini tournament, isn't it? And then basically that momentum, and whether you go in on a high or go in on a low or on the back of a disappointment, can be so important. It really can dictate things, and to that end, I mean, I think the job that Thomas Frank, who is such an impressive individual, by the way, has done at Brentford has been remarkable. Their BMW front three has been really exciting. Ben Rama is often argued, and I must say that there's probably an argument in this that he's the best player outside of the Premier League right now. But that final day and losing at Stoke and then losing at home to Barnsley, it was all in their hands. And at one point on Wednesday night, they were still going up because results dictated. And yet it's Swansea who've pulled off this incredible final day miracle. So they have to go up with a lift. But I have to say the other game is really interesting for me as well, because I think Fulham fans, I think every Londoner, and everyone who lives in London, no matter what team you support, has a little bit of a soft spot for Fulham, because whenever you go to Craven Cottage, it's a lovely place to go. And I always enjoy sort of kind of, following them and watching them for various reasons. And I have to say, all season long, Fulham fans have been going, well, we've got the best squad. They've certainly probably got the best striker, I think, the out-and-out number 9 in Mitrovic. But can they pull it off at the last? There's so much pressure on Scott Parker, and they kind of kept Mitrovic for one more season to try and get straight back up. And you'd have to say that really Fulham would be the favourites going into that game. But then Cardiff have, had themselves a miraculous run. This group of 4 clubs, I mean, the contrast in each situation makes it such an exciting Championship playoff round this year, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think Fulham would be my pick to go up. I think Swansea lost to Brentford home and away during the regular season. Brentford are the better team, but Swansea can look at this as a free hit. They wouldn't have expected to have qualified. They've now got 2 games where they can go and strut their stuff against a team who Brentford will be shattered by what happened on the final day. So I think that's a tough one to call. It's a bit of a clash of styles, I suppose. Cardiff and Fulham. Cardiff are a lot more direct, and Fulham have struggled against that kind of approach in the season. But I agree with John. I think the strength of depth in their squad should see them through, and I do think that they'll last the pace to go up and win the final as well.
Up next, we'll be looking ahead to next season. We know now when it starts, but what will it look like? There's so much we still don't know. That's next. Welcome back to the Sunday Supplement. We now know that the next Premier League season will start on September the 12th. The transfer window opens tomorrow for 10 weeks internationally and another 2 weeks domestically. But what we don't know is how many subs there'll be, how many fans will there be, how many clubs can afford to buy anything, and what exactly is happening to the cup competitions. John, let's start with subs. 5 subs are allowed. The Premier League must vote on it. What's your opinion?
Well, I feel really passionately against it for the whole season. Listen, I can understand wholeheartedly the argument for doing it in this short space of time. But make no mistake about it, it has been a game changer for the bigger clubs. And, when it was voted in, because they had the option to do it in lockdown or not, it went through 16-4, and obviously that was overwhelming. You need 14 votes in a Premier League meeting to get a motion through. So it's clearly going to be tight, I would argue, but the big clubs would clearly favour it. Why? Because, there was one game where Olley John Cross brought on 5 changes at once, and he can do that. He's got an amazing bench. Man City, I think, have arguably probably got the strongest squad in the Premier League. They've got an unbelievable squad. They've got an unbelievable team, an incredible manager in Pep Guardiola. And again, if the game's slipping away in the 70th minute, he can bring on 3 players all in one go because he has that luxury of making subs elsewhere and go and win the game. And I just think that defies really what we understand football to be in the 90-minute contest. I mean, I just think we need to go back to 3 substitutes. Funnily enough, I think we will. It was interesting that a couple of weeks ago I did a Zoom call with Roy Hodgson, and Roy Hodgson was saying that Crystal Palace did vote in favour of the 5 subs for this mini lockdown period, but it was his impression and his idea that they would vote against it next time. We can't have a vote on it, of course, until we know the final 20th team via the Championship playoffs. And again, it would be hard to argue that basically that they would vote in favour of it, because I'm sure that their squad will be stretched. So that's another one down, if you like. I just think it does favour the bigger clubs, the bigger clubs with the better squads, the stronger squads. And I just think we need to move away from it. I think that the Premier League and the clubs have done remarkably well to finish out this season. It's an incredible triumph for the Premier League. And again, I think to plan for next season, September the 12th, it will be a mini pre-season. So yes, we will have compacted fixture list, but it won't be the crazy number and schedule that we've got in this lockdown period. So I just think we need to balance that up and move away from the 5 substitutes. It's not fair.
Yeah, I just think it strips the skill out of management. If you think sort of during, irrespective of what they do during the week, the in-game aspect of management is, it's the team you pick, it's how you respond during a game. And if you've got a scenario where you can make five changes, you can change half of your outfield selection. You can, that takes away all of the importance of a starting 11. It removes all of the skill that goes into how you time a change, what kind of change you can do. It was the Bournemouth Man City game the other week when you've got City bringing Sterling, Mahrez, Rodri off the bench. Routinely they're stacking north of £300 million worth of players on their bench. And I'm yet to hear anything even remotely sensible as an argument that can be competitive when you compare that against maybe sort of 15, 16, even 17 teams in the Premier League. So I don't see any justification for it. Again, it was a rule of necessity, a little bit like the water breaks, and I think we're probably, as with the water breaks, we can see now that they're possible. It was a good precaution. It's possibly not necessary. I'd say the same thing with 5 subs.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, it was an FA Cup game, but I remember doing Norwich Man United, and that was. I mean, not only could they make 5 changes when that game went to extra time, United could. Well, both teams could make a 6th change. I mean, it was farcical, absolutely farcical, and the imbalance. It's hard enough for these. For the lesser lights of the Premier League to be able to match those top clubs, but when you can change 5 or 6 players in the FA Cup, it's too many. It was necessary, but I think the imbalance this summer is going to be different because you've actually got clubs that are going to be finishing their seasons at very, very different times. Liverpool, for example, they'll go on holiday tomorrow, and my understanding is that they're coming back around 3. They're giving their players around 3 weeks off, and then they're starting pre-season. Now that's going to be around mid-August. Well, Manchester City, for example, are going to be engaged in the Champions League competition until potentially, I think it's the 23rd of August, the final. So the advantage that Liverpool have got over Manchester City potentially there is huge. Chelsea, another one. If Chelsea, what do Chelsea do? If they don't qualify for the Champions League today, do they try and go for that game against Bayern Munich? They're 3-0 down from the first leg. I think it's August the 8th, that match. Or do they say, well, look, actually, we need to give our players a break. We need to start prioritising next season and essentially give up on the one chance they've got left, albeit a very remote one, to try and overturn that disadvantage in the Champions League title that they have. So there are imbalances in the summer. It's not an ideal situation for anyone, but I think if you maintain that 5 sub rule, while it created, there was some understanding of it because of the hectic fixture schedule for everybody in this sort of coda to the 1920 season. It doesn't solve the problems that you have in 2021. If anything, it just makes them worse.
What about the transfer market? Officially, that opens tomorrow. How will the coronavirus pandemic affect that? Is it a buyer's market this summer?
Yeah, I think it probably it's a very interesting, I think, market this summer. I really do. If you look at one that I think has been incredibly well telegraphed all season, all year, Manchester United and Jadon Sancho. Clearly, Man United want Sancho, but at what price and at what cost? I think it would be naive to suggest that values haven't significantly changed because the market in itself has absolutely changed. I'm sure that Borussia Dortmund wanted about £120 million before all this happened and all this played out. And now, United are clearly in a position whereby they're sort of saying, well, we can't afford that. And also, basically, what would be the backlash? Because I think that a lot of fans will look at it and say, well, is that really sort of kind of almost tasteful, if you like, to spend that amount of money on a player, no matter how good he is, no matter how much and how long they've wanted him for? But is that right in these sort of financial times when a lot of their fans, their lifeblood, are being financially disadvantaged themselves? Will there be an appetite for that? Therefore, I just think in that they'll try and bring that price down, and then, do Dortmund try and sell? And I think that's almost, representative of what might happen. Chelsea are clearly trying to rebuild, but in fairness to Chelsea, they didn't spend last summer because of the transfer ban, so they've clearly got money in the bank from then, and also from the even going back as far as the Hazard sale. So they've got that. They're trying to rebuild. They're making imaginative good signings. Chelsea, I'm sure that if they get in the Champions League, they'll probably go and get Kai Havertz, who's probably arguably the most exciting German prospect, if you like, right now. So I think it will be an interesting market. I think you'll get some big deals. You will get the exceptions to the rule. But I do think a lot of the clubs will be railing back, and I think it'll be more in the £20-30 million sort of bracket for the majority of clubs this summer, rather than the as we become accustomed to in recent seasons, of the spectacular 80, 90 and 100s.
Yeah, I think the kind of summer of sort of mega deals might be a little bit subdued. Chelsea are obviously going all guns blazing on this. It looks like they're going to have a pretty spectacular window, sort of judging from it at this point. I wonder whether or not this situation's going to influence clubs when it comes to players who are approaching ends of contracts, and you start having that kind of 2 years to go. Do we cash in kind of dilemma? I think it might embolden them to hold on and see if the market turns. So I think there'll be less offloading, if you will, than what we perhaps normally see. I just, for the life of me, I can't see how all bar a small handful of clubs can approach this business as normal. I mean, they're those clubs which are massively wealthy. So again, sort of Chelsea, Man City, Liverpool as well. I think this could actually be a good opportunity for them, because some clubs might have felt the impact of this more than others, and so they could be more vulnerable to accepting an offer. But I think generally we're going to see quite a depressed market.
Yeah, look, I mean, cash is king. It's a golden rule. It always has been, but it is more than ever now. And, there are very, very few clubs, United, Chelsea, being among them, who can still operate at a similar level to pre the pandemic. But I think you normally find that there's one deal that kind of sets the tone for the summer. Think about like the Harry Maguire deal that sort of set the benchmark for a top level centre back at 80 million. And then you found clubs sort of saying, well, look, Ben Chilwell's quite a good example. When Chelsea have been interested in Ben Chilwell, they've sort of said, well, look, we got 80 million for Maguire. That's the sort of level we're looking at. And, everyone kind of adjust their valuations off the back of one of those big deals. So, if Jadon Sancho was to move to United early in the summer, for whatever fee that would be, it would set the tone, I think, for the whole market. But from the conversations that I'm having, I'm sort of hearing that a lot of clubs are looking at different ways of trying to raise finances. There was a private equity fund that was sort of floating around the Premier League around before the restart that were offering. I mean, this fund was huge. We're talking sort of in excess of £1 billion, and this fund was there being offered to the Premier League as a whole to say, look, and the EFL, by the way, to say, look, if you need some sort of short-term cash flow issues, you could borrow money from this fund at a very low rate of interest, and it will get you sort of through to the other side. Now, that didn't happen in the end because there wasn't a collective agreement about how that money would be distributed. I think particularly the EFL clubs thought they were still going to get a handout from government, and therefore obviously the interest rate would be much lower than if they were borrowing from a private equity group. But I now understand that a lot of clubs are looking at individual deals with these kind of funds to say, well, okay, if there isn't going to be a Premier League-wide deal or an EFL-wide deal, maybe one club, I won't name one in particular, but if one club could go to that fund and say, look, could we borrow X amount at this rate of interest, then they can play in the market, and it gives them a stronger hand. But you have to say that, if you're going to borrow at 5, 6, 7%, which is still quite a good level of interest if you're borrowing, say, £100 million, that's still a gamble in this market, because you don't know the valuations of players as a whole, because you don't know how clubs are going to respond to it. You also don't know when fans are going to come back in. You don't know when the revenue streams are going to return to normal. So it is a big gamble if you're going to spend, even if you're borrowing in the way that I'm describing.
So intriguing what 10 weeks of the transfer window it's going to be. Now, this is the last Sunday supplement of the season, and when we come back, we'll have a look back at this extraordinary campaign. We'll discuss the player of the year, the manager of the year, and the story of the year. Welcome back to the Sunday Supplement for the last time. It's the last show of the season, and time to just have a look back at what an extraordinary season this has turned into. I'd like to start, boys, with a moment or a story that stands out for you. Riath, what's yours?
I struggle to look past the sort of, the end of the Pochettino romance and the start of Jose Mourinho, and apologies. I kind of, as someone with young children, I kind of frame things around Disney a little bit, and it's kind of akin to the part of Lion King where the hyenas take over. And it's, for me, it's just been a little bit sad. I mean, we had this lovely story with Pochettino, the way they played, the success, punching above their weight. It was all fantastic. I don't think anyone would deny that by the time he left, it was dire. It was rotten. There were problems with some of the players. I don't think he particularly wanted to be there anymore. At the end, the Champions League final was probably the natural conclusion to the relationship. But it's then this decision to go to Jose Mourinho, which I can't see any sense in it. And I think we look at what Mourinho's done. Look what he inherited and where they are now. And yeah, he's got results, and we knew they'd get results, and that's obviously why Daniel Levy appointed him. And it's the only reason he appointed him was for numbers on a piece of paper. But I still see, even with the improvement, I don't see any level of happy ending, and I can't see any great peak as well. Mourinho, we know, needs to spend money. It's been a pattern of behaviour, certainly since he's been in this country and at Real Madrid and at Inter. He's had to be able to spend money to build teams in his image. Tottenham are not even remotely a team in his image, and Tottenham are a team which don't have anything like the spending power they would have had before. Now that they're paying off this stadium, it feels like completely the wrong manager at entirely the wrong time. And for me, when we're talking about moments of the season, that for me, I think in 2 or 3 years we could still be talking about that as a sort of transitional moment for Tottenham. It could obviously. I could look a fool in 3 years when Tottenham finally won a trophy, but I wouldn't bet on it. And starting with the transfer window, I think the sort of real problems of Mourinho could be about to start.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great moment. I felt like I couldn't pick a conventional one because this hasn't been a conventional season. I felt, for me, in terms of a moment that had impact, it would probably be the collective show of support for Black Lives Matter in that first game, Aston Villa against Sheffield United, because quite often these things are trailed beforehand, and nobody really. I mean, I knew that something was going to happen. I think a few people had written that there was going to be some sort of show of solidarity, but for all 22 players to take the knee with the officials in that first game at kickoff, right at the moment when the eyes of the world really were on the Premier League restarting, it's not a struggle I can obviously pretend to understand. It's one I can empathise with. It's one I've tried to write about and highlight. But I thought, for all the words that we've tried to search for in highlighting the issues and and talking about racism and discrimination, that one act was just, it said more than any words ever could. I really hope we're talking about transitional watershed moments. I know it's become criticised in some regards because it's happened so much and maybe it's lost its impact, but I just feel the first time it happened, it was a real wow moment. It felt as though finally this struggle was starting to break through into new ground.
I'm going to go for Liverpool's title presentation on Wednesday night, not just because I think Liverpool have been the best team by a country mile in the Premier League, not just because it ended a 30-year wait, not just because Jurgen Klopp, I think, has been outstanding both on and off the pitch, and not just because that some of the performances and players have just been incredible. Their front three, their fullbacks. I mean, it's Virgil van Dijk. Jordan Henderson as captain. I think they've had this incredible season, but it was more than that. It was what it represented. Even staging a title presentation was a hard enough thing to organise in itself. And it just felt to me the coming together of all the planning. I remember being on this show way back in March, and it just seemed an incredible thing that we were facing ahead of us. How on earth are we going to play out this season? How on earth is it going to get done? Do we abandon the season? Do kind of Liverpool, i.e. then miss out on the title because the season's not going to get done? I do think a lot of us, myself included, thought, I'm not sure this is going to work. But the Premier League deserves so much congratulation, I think, as do the EFL, let's not forget them, but for playing out this season. It's been remarkable. It's gone without a hitch. The games have been, different, but in their own way entertaining. But the whole process has been just astonishing. And you know, I think so many clubs and so many people involved around this process will never have it again. It's been a unique season, deserve a lot of congratulation. And that title presentation, to me, brought everything together and was the representation of Project Restart, lockdown, football surviving.
Liverpool, worthy champions. I think everyone would agree with that. They also probably have the manager of the year, and they definitely have the player of the year in Jordan Henderson. Riath, a decision you agree with?
I actually voted for Kevin De Bruyne. I think I would rather elevate De Bruyne than talk down Jordan Henderson. But Jordan Henderson, I don't think there's any disputing at all just how important he is to that team. You know, he is the spirit of Liverpool. When he doesn't play, they don't play as well. It's very simple. He's an incredible leader, and the stuff what he's done off the pitch as well. This season around the pandemic, around the NHS, you can't overstate just how impressive that is. And I think that's clearly had a bearing on the vote. The parameters of the vote are wider than who is the player of the year. For me, I've kept it more to the player who I think is the best player in the league. I think he's one of the best players in the world, certainly since all season. In fact, when you look at sort of things like the games against Arsenal, the game against Real Madrid, De Bruyne, he's a truly special player. He's one of those who's coming into the conversation about who's been the best overseas player in the Premier League. Almost, when we see him on form, and this really was the season when he came back to form. I don't see him as a player who's got an equal. I think I think he had the best season.
I voted for Jordan Henderson. I also got some of the negative feedback from voting for Jordan Henderson. I agree with Riath. Kevin De Bruyne is the best player, I think, in the league at the moment. He's one of the best. He's arguably the best player in the world at the moment. Right up there with the Messis and the Ronaldos. Jordan Henderson isn't probably the best player in the Liverpool team. I think you could put Sadio Mane, you could put Virgil van Dijk ahead of him in terms of the pure contribution to Liverpool's title success on the pitch in terms of affecting matches. But where the issue comes with the FWA award is balancing the on-field performances with this concept, this idea of leading by precept and example. And, this is a season where it's unlike any other because of this global pandemic. And when Matt Hancock essentially puts footballers into the spotlight by saying, you need to take a pay cut in March, it really put the whole game on the back foot. And although there were already efforts underway, sort of individual players were donating to the NHS or to specific charities to help local causes, clubs were doing their bit, it really needed somebody to bring that effort together as a kind of collective, almost sport-wide response to the criticism that Matt Hancock had delivered to the game, to the English game. And that person was Jordan Henderson. He brought the players together. He brought the captains together under the Players Together banner. He organised that collective effort, which has raised millions of pounds for the NHS. And look, there are other players who've done it. Marcus Rashford obviously stands out in that category. He's raised millions himself. He even managed to get the government to change their policy on free school meals. But I think if you're trying to align the on-field contribution with that off-field contribution, Jordan Henderson is the driving force of that Liverpool team. They're worse without him. He sets the standards. And in addition to that, all of the work he's done in a year where the pandemic has affected the whole world, I think history will judge Jordan Henderson very well. So should we.
Yeah, I must say I voted Jordan Henderson. Blimey. I go back a few years when I voted for Scott Parker as player of the year because he was an outstanding individual in West Ham. I think they went down that season. And since then, I made a rule that I'm always going to choose a player from a team that wins a trophy. Sometimes you have to vote before those trophies are handed out, but you give yourself the best chance. Listen, I understand Pep Guardiola, what he said in the week, a little bit of frustration that he's always a Liverpool player. I mean, the PFA Awards last couple of seasons, when Man City won the title and were the best team in the country, they went to Liverpool players. But that's the PFA Award. The FWA Award last season went to Raheem Sterling, who I thought was the best player in the country in a title-winning team. This season has been unique. It's been different. Jordan Henderson, captain of the best team in the country, has, I think, therefore, deserves it for what he's achieved on the pitch. Off it is even more impressive. As James was saying, the leader that he is. He's become a Liverpool legend. He's become a footballing icon. Someone who's got an incredible voice, which he's used. He's defied the government and those horrible messages, which I think are totally misplaced about footballers. And I think he for what he's done for the NHS charities, for what he's done for football, he absolutely is Footballer of the Year in my book.
We're running out of time quickly, but I do want to get to Manager of the Year. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with the fact that Jurgen Klopp should win the Premier League Manager of the Year, but is there a case to be made for Chris Wilder, for Frank Lampard, for the wider Manager of the Year, or should it go to the dominance of Liverpool? Riath, start us off, but you're going to have to be brief.
Yeah, I don't want to be. You sound like I'm being too contrary, but I'd again go Chris Wilder. I think Klopp's done an amazing job. Liverpool have an amazing squad. Wilder punched far more above his weight.
Yeah, I would give it to Jurgen Klopp. I just think 96 points and the weight of expectation, the pressure, the history, the 30-year wait, all of that sort of thing. I think we can become a bit blasé, a bit immune to how good they've been because of how long it's been since they established that lead at the top of the table. So, yeah, Chris Wilder's been very good. Frank Lampard's exceeded expectations at Chelsea, but for me, it has to be Jurgen Klopp.
I go Jurgen Klopp as well. I do think it's obvious that. I mean, it's 30 years. But I just think that Frank Lampard, for me, if Chelsea finish top four and also win the FA Cup, which is well within their grasp on both fronts, this is a guy that I don't think has had a great deal of mentions this season. And I think deserves perhaps a little bit more credit than he gets. I think he's had a remarkable first year in Premier League management. Absolutely incredible. And I think if he achieves those things, then he should be in the conversation. But Klopp all day long for what he's achieved at Liverpool this season.
What I find amazing is that we've got through a whole show, the last show of the season, and the first season, which has featured VAR, and we've not mentioned it once. So while we're on this foreshot, thumbs up for VAR or thumbs down for VAR this season? Off you go. Oh, John, why? You've got 30 seconds.
Well, because, listen, it's been absolutely beset by problems. Absolutely. No one's going to deny that it's got things horribly wrong, but it's the only way. And listen, we could talk all day about one of the most controversial ones was Harry Kane having a goal disallowed at Sheffield United. Now, that's not VAR. And it just drives me insane that basically people go on about it. That's the madness of the handball law, which is totally wrong, is being tweaked for next season. And I just think VAR, yes, it's caused controversy. I mean, blimey, I'm not sure whether it's going to get better next season, but it's the only way forward. Football has to move with the times. VAR.
John, I'm going to have to stop you there, I'm afraid. We are out of time. Just time. Thank you guys for joining us. Riath, John and James. Just time to let you know all the games you can watch on Sky Sports this afternoon. This is where they are. Leicester Man U main event, Chelsea Wolves on football, Arsenal Watford on the Premier League channel, Everton Bournemouth on golf, Crystal Palace Spurs you can see on Action, Man City Norwich on Pick and Sky One, Burnley Brighton on Arena, Southampton Sheffield United on Mix.